with Workplace Safety. This meeting is now being recorded. So, welcome to Harnessing Your Joint Health and Safety Committee's Greatness. I'm Tova Larson, a health and safety consultant based out of Ottawa, Ontario, with Workplace Safety and Prevention Services, one of Ontario's fantastic safe work associations. Our mandate and mission in the province is to bring more workers home safe at the end of every single day. Just a couple of heads up about sort of webinars. Your audio will typically come through your computer. With Zoom, you may be going through the dial-in audio as well. I'm not sure with Zoom whether your camera is going to remain off, but I know for our sessions we typically do. You may be able to unmute, and we're going to be using the chat as well to participate in meeting-related discussions. And this session is called a Safety Connection. Safety Connection goals include learning and sharing and discovering really what's of value to you. I like to think of Safety Connection as, almost being able to pick the little nuggets of gold out. We may talk about something that may not resonate as well for your workplace, or you might think, wow, like I have a health and safety rep, not necessarily a JHSC. Are there still pieces of this session that I might be able to pick to be able to help me on my safety journey? And I absolutely will tell you, yes. It's an opportunity to connect virtually with industry peers, facilitate an exchange of best practices, and attend from your personal workspace. So I'll give you a little bit of information about myself before we get started. I started my career as a laboratory chemist. I didn't actually start my career in health and safety. And I got into health and safety because I got hurt at work. I was that classic story of new and young workers being injured in the workplace. And having the experience of being injured drove me to want to focus on prevention. I knew that my injury could have been prevented for $30. And I thought, wow, was a year of my life really worth $30 of savings to that organization? So I took that passion and turned it into my career. I've spent the last 20 years working in health and safety, where I have worked in the federally regulated sector. I've worked in the provincially regulated sector. I've also worked in the private sector, the public sector. And much of that time, in fact, I've spent either as a health and safety coordinator or as a health and safety consultant working directly with joint health and safety committees, federal workplace health and safety committees, and federal policy committees. And this session was born out of identifying some challenges that were common to many different types of committees, but I also identified that while many committees were coming with great intentions, a lot of them were stuck in something I call inspect, meet, repeat. You do your inspection, you talk about the housekeeping items you found, and that's about it. So this is going to be an opportunity to be able to dig deeper into learning more about how exactly we can level up. So what are we going to be covering here on the agenda today? We're going to be discussing, do we need a joint health and safety committee? The Joint Health and Safety Committee mandate. We're also going to be talking a little bit about provincially regulated versus federally regulated, which I think is a really good place to start. We're going to be discussing the people around the table. We're going to be clarifying some expectations, discussing how to plan and run your meetings. We'll talk more about the Joint Health and Safety Committee's involvement in change management, how to use your data to drive you to make the best risk reduction possible in the shortest period of time. We'll also talk about how, as a committee, you can catch senior leadership's eye. And last, we'll talk about how WSPS can help. So when does a company need a JHSC? Before we launch into what's on the slide, we should probably have a conversation, especially in a First Nations context, about provincially versus federally regulated work. Work that's performed by the Band Council, by the organization responsible for the community, within their community on First Nations land, is federally regulated work. It's regulated by a law called the Canada Labour Code, and more specifically in the world of safety, the Canada Labour Code Part 2. However, there are some aspects of First Nations operations that may in fact be provincially regulated. Healthcare, since it is typically provincially funded, is provincially regulated. Policing is often, again, provincially regulated. So understanding your own context about when the Canada Labor Code Part 2 applies versus the Occupational Health and Safety Act is very important. Another important thing to know from an application standpoint is that in a First Nations context, privately run businesses that are operating within the community are also provincially regulated. It is the federally funded work of the Band Council and the organization that is the federally regulated entity within the community. So while we will be talking about largely provincial here, I'll also be able to answer questions that you have that may be related to federally regulated, and much of the meat of this session is agnostic. It applies to both federally regulated committees and provincially regulated committees. So when we look at when a company needs a provincially regulated organization, whether that be healthcare within a community, policing within a community, or we're talking about a private business within a community, when does a provincially regulated company need a joint health and safety committee? Well, if a business is very small, 1 to 5 workers regularly employed, unless they work with a designated substance, which are one of 11 toxic, nasty substances, we're talking about things like lead, asbestos, benzene, mercury, arsenic. There are others. If you work with one of those toxic, nasty substances, you need a joint health and safety committee, regardless of workplace size. But if you do not work with one of the 11 designated substances, if you're in a very small workplace, 1 to 5 workers, there's no legal requirement to have a joint health and safety committee representative or a JHSC. In slightly larger workplaces with 6 to 19 workers regularly employed, a health and safety representative is required, and we'll discuss more about what the representatives do through the session as well. A workplace with 20 workers regularly employed requires a joint health and safety committee. The committee must consist of at least 2 members, and 1 worker and 1 management member must be certified. The joint health and safety committee in a workplace with 50 or more workers regularly employed is larger. It has to consist of at least 4 members, but still 1 worker member and 1 management member, again, must be certified. When we talk about a federally regulated context, at a workplace with 1 to 19 workers regularly employed in that workplace, they would need a health and safety rep. In a workplace with 20 or more workers regularly employed, they would need a workplace health and safety committee. Functions very similarly to a JHSC. In addition, though, an organization with 300 or more staff throughout the whole organization, such as the entire Band Council, as you start counting all of the various heads under that federally regulated umbrella, if they have 300 or more, they would require a workplace, or rather a health and safety policy committee in addition to their health and safety workplace committees. So let's talk a little bit more about the Joint Health and Safety Committee mandate. We'll talk a little bit more about mandates in general, as well as our health and safety representatives. So let's first talk about what a Joint Health and Safety Committee is not. A Joint Health and Safety Committee is not the health and safety cowboys, roping, riding, finding the bad guys. Nor is the Joint Health and Safety Committee a health and safety policing organization. The Joint Health and Safety Committee does not have the powers of the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, provincial, or Employment and Social Development Canada Labor Program, federal, to enforce occupational health and safety legislation. Nor is it the responsibility of joint health and safety committees to enforce health and safety rules, policies, or programs in the workplace. So whose job is it? Whose responsibility is it to enforce the law? Internally, with the internal responsibility system, it's the supervisors. Externally, it's the regulator, either ESDC, labor program, as mentioned earlier, for federally regulated, and the Ministry of Labor, Immigration, Training, and Skills Development for provincially regulated organizations. In terms of the purpose and powers of the Joint Health and Safety Committee, the Joint Health and Safety Committee's goal is to identify workplace hazards and health and safety problems, and then they bring them to the attention of the employer. They do this by making recommendations about specific controls. They make recommendations about specific hazards and concerns, but they also make recommendations about safety related policies, programs, training, and processes. They're also consulted by the employer on testing, but they're also consulted on the development and review of training for workers on workplace violence and harassment, on policies and programs, training and information for those working with hazardous materials. And they meet on a regular schedule. In the provincially regulated sphere, joint health and safety committees must meet at least quarterly. That is 4 times per year at regular 3-month intervals. In the federally regulated world, they must meet 9 times a year, again at on a regular schedule. Now, when it comes to the federal side of things, 9 times a year, you might think, well, can we just skip the entire summer, June, July, and August? And I say, well, yes, but that's not right. That's not regular. We want to ensure that we are not having these long breaks in time. But joint health and safety committees ultimately are meeting regularly, making recommendations about maintenance, monitoring, and development of programs. Now, what about the purpose and powers of the health and safety representative? Perhaps you're in a smaller workplace. And remember, this all is driven by what's called a geographical workplace model. By geographical workplace, I mean, I want you to picture a restaurant, or it could be an auto garage. Who works at that particular location? Not the sister location up the road or on the other side of town. It's based on at that particular workplace, that particular building, that particular address. So again, if you have 1 to 19 federal, 6 to 19 provincial, you would have a health and safety representative. Instead, they perform many of the same functions. They have many of the same powers as the Joint Health and Safety Committee to identify hazards, to again bring them to the attention of the employer. They similarly make recommendations to the employer for the improvement of health and safety around policies, programs. They're also consulted about testing. But rather than meeting on a regular schedule, they meet as often as necessary with the employer. So there isn't necessarily a set schedule. This is a smaller workplace. So there is an expectation that there's going to be a little bit more, perhaps organic discussion, and perhaps less of a need for the formalized, regular scheduled meetings. Now, when we look at the internal responsibility system, I like to think of it as a jigsaw puzzle. What makes a jigsaw puzzle interesting is that all of the pieces are complementary but unique. And the Joint Health and Safety Committee, their role is to monitor and oversee this system. They're looking to see that all of the various parties are undertaking their responsibilities and communicating and collaborating in the process. Worker responsibilities include following the policies and programs, supervisors communicate and enforce them, and employers establish them. When we talk about the jigsaw puzzle concept, think about our 3-piece jigsaw puzzle here. Each piece is different. They also have to click together and be organized in a very particular way for our safety picture to come together. When we look at policies and programs specifically, and you may have multiple little puzzles that make up your overall safety program, but when it comes to policies and procedures, what you'll notice is that the duties of the various workplace parties are interlinked. For policies and procedures, employer establishes, supervisor communicates, different, different role. Worker follows, reports concerns. Again, a different role. But every one of those roles is critical to the success of your policies and programs. Perhaps you're in a workplace and the Joint Health and Safety Committee, as part of their monitoring, they identify that the supervisors are not enforcing health and safety rules in the workplace for their frontline staff. So it's a free for all. The workers are doing whatever they want. In terms of the role of the JHSC, remember what's within the power of the committee: making recommendations about hazards, making recommendations about policies, programs, training, information, development of programs. One thing that's not inside of your box is HR issues. So we certainly would not be turning to the employer and saying, we recommend that the employer fire all of the supervisors. Instead, I want the Joint Health and Safety to look and say, why are supervisors not enforcing health and safety rules? What's the reason for this? Because there's always going to be a reason. Perhaps they are not aware of their own responsibilities as a manager or supervisor. Maybe they need something like a supervisory responsibilities and due diligence course. Maybe they don't know about the Occupational Health and Safety Act, or maybe in the federal sector, they don't know enough about the Canada Labor Code Part 2 and about what their responsibilities are as a representative of the employer. Maybe they just lack the soft skills to really support staff in their challenges. Maybe they don't understand how to guide or lead. Maybe they don't um, maybe they don't understand the difference between being a mentor and being a manager. Maybe they need help understanding more about how to coach, how to mentor, how to guide, how to lead, and the importance of walking their own talk. From a Joint Health and Safety Committee standpoint, the recommendations that I would make if supervisors were not enforcing health and safety rules would be about supporting those supervisors better to set everyone in this up for success. How are we going to provide them with the training and information, the tools and the resources to be able to do their jobs better, to understand their role, and to work collaboratively with all of those workplace parties? To bring those puzzle pieces and clicking them back together and being sure everybody is doing their part. So how does a Joint Health and Safety Committee support a strong internal responsibility system? The Joint Health and Safety Committee monitors the internal responsibility system, measures the safety culture and the relationships, and acts as a communication forum. It's that opportunity for employers, supervisors, and workers to come together to discuss safety issues and work toward effective, efficient solutions that are going to be a win-win-win. They're a win for workers because it makes it safer. It's a win for the employer because they're reducing their own legal liabilities. When we look big picture, though, the Joint Health and Safety Committee, as champions for health and safety, in a lot of ways become champions in your community for health and safety as well. When I look at the importance of health and safety in a First Nations context, you know, many of your communities, there's a strong community aspect. Folks support each other, they know each other. And when we look at the value in investing in safety, the value is not just that it brings more people home safe at the end of every day, but it strengthens your community. And that's something that your organization, that your Joint Health and Safety Committee can harness as you look at supporting a strong internal responsibility system. The working together piece is the piece that, in my experience, is what brings it all together. How do we measure safety culture? How do we measure relationships? One of my favorite ways is every time you're on an inspection or someone maybe comes to you with a health and safety concern or complaint, always ask, have you mentioned this to your frontline manager or supervisor? If they say no, ask them why. You're going to learn maybe that the last time they reported a hazard, they got yelled at, or that their manager didn't take the last time they reported seriously. Maybe they reported a concern and nothing happened. Those are all indications that the internal responsibility system may be at risk. That worker may be undertaking their own responsibilities, but maybe the supervisor is trying their best to solve the problem but doesn't have senior leadership support. Maybe they need the help of the Joint Health and Safety Committee to get the issue moving forward. Perhaps they are not reporting because they don't feel comfortable, or maybe they're not reporting because they don't understand their own role. It's an opportunity to be able to understand more about where your own benefits, where your strengths are as an organization from internal responsibility system, or where maybe your weak points are for opportunities for improvement. So let's talk about the people around the table. So, who is around the table? We've got the co chairs. They plan and organize the discussion. They lead the meetings. They make sure conclusions are reached and that, things are I like to say the clocks are running on time. There's the secretary who keeps the records and minutes. There are certified members. Now, this is specific to provincially regulated workplaces. Federally regulated workplaces do not have certified members, but there is a requirement to train all of the members. Certified members in provincially regulated workplaces have specific additional responsibilities in situations where work is dangerous. And then there are the members at large. These are people that don't share special roles around the committee table, but they share their own experiences and ideas, and they often bring ideas from those they represent. Again, in provincially regulated workplaces only, certified members take a chief prevention officer approved training program to become certified. Each committee requires one certified member and one on the worker side and one certified member on the management side. And together, they have the power to stop dangerous work. It's also preferable for certified members to be involved in inspections and work refusals in case they in fact identify a situation that may be a dangerous circumstance. They'll have the ability and the power to be able to act. One of the top questions I get is, can the employer select their dream team? Well, no, except if they're on the management side. Management and the employer do get to choose the management members of the committee, but they do not get to choose the worker members of the Health and Safety Committee, either provincial or federal. Under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, management members are selected by the employer or by management, and the management co-chair is selected by management joint health and safety committee members. If we have 3 members that all represent management, 3 that represent workers, the 3 that represent management would discuss amongst themselves. The worker members would select amongst themselves. The worker members, though, are selected by the workers or by a union if they are unionized. And of course, the co-chair is selected in a very similar fashion by the Joint Health and Safety Committee members discussing amongst themselves of that side of the workplace only. One of the top questions I get, though, about selection is, but what if no one volunteers? Can we volunteer folks? And the answer is no, but you can make things look a lot more appealing. And we'll talk about one way to do that in a moment. Now, when I look at how typical joint health and safety committees are structured, often they're the minimum size required by law. They have equal management and worker representation. It's just based on whoever volunteered. Sometimes the management co-chair is even the safety coordinator, and you have this constant cycle of alternates cycling in and out to be able to meet quorum, so we have enough people around the table to make a decision. Great joint health and safety committees do things differently. They don't use alternates. The members are active, they show up, and they're participating. The safety coordinator is a guest, a perpetually invited and welcome guest, but they are a guest. They are not someone who is representing a particular side, either management or worker. They're an advisor. And why is this so important? Because oftentimes when the management co-chair is your safety coordinator, folks, everyone around the table just turns to the safety person and goes, well, you make the decision. Great joint health and safety committees are also sized for capacity and involvement. They break their seats based on operational groups. If you've got a car dealership, we've got parts and sales and service and the accounting department, and we've got the body shop, and they all have different needs and different challenges. And we would want to have one worker seat for each. We also have typically a management co-chair or at least some level of management that involves a senior leader rather than just lead hands and frontline supervisors. And great joint health and safety committees have more worker members than management members. There's no need for it to be 50-50. So, how do we make our joint health and safety committee cool? So, no one volunteered. Write a realistic job ad. Remind folks that it makes them visible in the organization, that you're going to set them up for success with training, and it's a great opportunity for professional development. We want to have them have input on change, contribute to problem solving, and remind them that it looks great on a resume. Be clear about the time commitment and expectations, including that their frontline manager or supervisor will help ensure that their time is respected and that most of their duties, if with extenuating circumstances aside, such as a work stoppage or a critical injury or fatality investigation, that most of the work they'll be able to do within their regular workday, and that they will be able, their workload will be managed with their manager to ensure that they're not creating more workload for themselves. Remind them that no experience is needed and that they are not taking on any new additional legal liabilities or responsibilities by being a member of the Joint Health and Safety Committee. And when it comes to professional development, I would encourage you to provide training to all of your Joint Health and Safety Committee members about your top hazards. If you have warehouses and racks, I would encourage you to take the CSA A344 Inspecting and Maintaining Steel Storage Racks course. If your committee is having conversations about workplace violence, maybe you put them through a course that focuses on workplace violence and de-escalation strategies. We could be providing professional development opportunities about hazard specific items. If you've got radiation safety, include something on that. If you're working with chemicals, send them for the spills training, even if they just work in the office, so they can understand more about your total organizational context. Ultimately, making your JHSC cool is about more than just bringing in donuts. It's about being able, as these individual members, to see what's in it for me. If I'm someone who always finds change hard, or I say, "Well, I wish I had input on that," remind them that they, in fact, can have input. They don't have veto power. Ultimately, these are just recommendations. It's really important to understand that the Joint Health and Safety Committee is an advisory body. They don't hold the big stick, but being able to be part of the process allows us to contribute to solving our problems. We also want to clarify expectations, and we can do that in a terms of reference, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Be clear about the time commitment, including how that workload will be managed. Be sure they know how many inspections per worker member are expected, again, so they can understand kind of what they're getting into. And we want to set a very clear expectation that attendance is required. Unless you are on vacation, you are off sick, you are expected to be. If you are in the workplace or you are working that day, you are expected to be attending that meeting and carrying out those duties. As a joint health and safety committee, one great way to build bridges is to allow guests. Welcome any staff to attend. You could post the agendas on your health and safety board in advance to ensure that folks know what topics are coming up. So if they would like to attend, they can make arrangements to do so. I always recommend that you allow guests to speak, but we want to ensure they don't derail or monopolize the conversation. And depending on the type of committee you have, if it's a smaller workplace, allow them to speak on any of the topics that might be on the agenda. If it's a much larger committee, I use the example of workplace policy committees. I always allow guests to speak on the topic to which they were either invited to contribute or the topic for which they have signed up to contribute. Another hot tip for better functionality of joint health and safety committees is and this is also true for health and safety representatives, is term limits. Consider creating a term limit of 2 to 3 years. It ensures that you're having those regular opportunities for the workers to select the person they believe represents them now. It's a great opportunity to continue to get sort of that new blood. If you've got a committee of 10 people, though, don't have them all change over at the same time. Like, you want to kind of go 3 a year, right? So that over a 3-year span, so that you're still getting institutional knowledge. You don't have everybody sort of sitting around the table going, well, I'm brand new, me too. Do allow folks to run for successive terms. Some folks are really dedicated, they're really great at what they do, and we don't want to shut down individuals that are contributing positively. But for those that are not contributing positively, if they are not attending, I do suggest you create a non-attendance clause. And it can be as simple as saying that any Joint Health and Safety Committee member who has not attended a meeting, it could be, if you're meeting every 3 months, if they haven't attended 2 meetings in a row without a good reason, that their seat is declared vacant. If you're meeting monthly, you could say if they haven't attended a meeting in 3 months and they without a good reason, we talk about good reason, like don't kick people when they're down if they're going through cancer treatment or something like that. That is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about people that joined the Joint Health and Safety Committee and kind of just ghosted you or just aren't very responsible. It allows you to be able to declare the seat vacant so you can create space for someone who really wants to be there and is going to contribute to actually be there. I also am not a fan of alternates on committees of any kind because they don't attend regularly and they often lack the context and background behind a particular topic. I can't assign them to do a Joint Health and Safety Committee, inspection. They're not coming to the next meeting, so I can't assign them to do homework in between. Often they're just there to fill a seat so that we can get quorum so we have enough people to make a decision. And like, that's not a great outcome. Like, I can eat a magic bag up in the microwave and stick it in a seat, and it's warm too, but that doesn't mean that it's contributing in the way that we really need to. I would much rather have a committee of like 4 people that are really dedicated than have a committee of 4, a whole pile of alternates. People are constantly cycling in and out. It's just really difficult to be able to build the team dynamic, and it's difficult to be able to get things done from one meeting to the next if you have this sea of alternates. Another thing I'd recommend is new member onboarding. Develop a strategy. This is one way to prevent the ghosters, where they show up to one meeting, they panic, and then you never see them again. You want to set them up with a more experienced buddy who's from the same side, either worker or management. In terms of offering prospective members the opportunity to learn more about what the committee does, as someone is getting onboarded, offer them the opportunity to like ride along with the next workplace inspection or to shadow someone. But you can also offer that for prospective members. You could even have someone say, hey, like, would you like to come on our next workplace inspection? Like, reach out to these 2 co-chairs or to the worker co-chair, and we'll put you in touch with who's doing the inspection. That can be a great way to pique the interest in someone who may be interested in joining a health and safety committee in the future, but they don't really know what you actually do. I suggest that a new member meet with the co-chairs first before their first meeting, so they've got sort of face to name. I set them up with the terms of reference, give them a chance to read the minutes of the last couple of meetings, and then discuss with the co-chairs so that they're better positioned to sort of start slow. And also they have that opportunity to be able to come into that meeting better prepared and feeling more comfortable. When it comes to planning and running the meetings, set yourself up with an agenda. We always want to start with our old problems first and move on to new problems last. Review the last minutes. Do not read them dotting I's, crossing T's. We really just want to follow up on the action items and be sure that, if you've got a response from the employer from the recommendations from the previous meeting, what was the response? In very large workplaces, sometimes they even have subcommittees that focus on like mental health or machine guarding, or maybe they're thinking about forklift safety. There are a lot of different ways that subcommittees can look. Really, that's better for bigger workplaces rather than smaller workplaces. But we figure out where all of our action items are at. We want to check to see they get finished, and then we talk about our new problems last. I also typically recommend reviewing the workplace inspection as part of your meeting agenda as well. And just a quick reminder that even though you may only be meeting 9 times a year, or even though you may only be meeting meeting quarterly, Joint Health and Safety Committee worker members must inspect all or part of the workplace every single month, even if the meetings are less frequent than that. Terms of reference. Does your committee have a terms of reference? You may or may not. This is effectively a founding document to ensure everyone is on the same page. It typically includes the purpose of the committee, the departments represented, the rules around taking minutes, any of your record keeping procedures, might include a template that you use for your agendas, any of the team norms that we're going to talk about, the frequency of the meetings, quarterly, monthly, what have you, how you make decisions, how long your terms of office are, how the co-chairs are going to work together, how you establish your annual goals and objectives, and what your quorum might be. How many people do you need to make a decision? If you're in a provincially regulated workplace, you may also want to consider granting special stop work powers, unilateral stop work powers to all of your certified members. And I would include that in the terms of reference as well. Composition of committee is another thing that we want to include. So when we think about our seats, how many seats, and who is in fact able to vote for that seat in a non-unionized context. In a unionized context, it is the union who gets to select the members. I would still, though, ensure that the composition is broken out based on those operational needs. As we think about how we communicate together, commit as a group to being collaborative and constructive. You know, we want to focus on the issue, not the person. We may want, if we're having folks that drone on and on, give some time limits to discuss their concerns on a particular issue and force people to tighten things up a bit. We want to have a strategy for conflict management, and then really commit to removing those hats. It's not worker member versus management member. It's joint health and safety committees members together working collaboratively. And figure out as co-chairs how you're going to manage conversation. How do you get a word in edgewise? How do you express that you have something to add so that you, again, avoid monopolization, but also it ensures that, you know, some folks may be reluctant to try to speak up, creating space for all of our voices. Now, again, provincially regulated workplaces only. Stop work powers include both bilateral with a certified worker member and a certified management member, and unilateral stop work, which only involves one certified member. All certified members in the province of Ontario have bilateral work stop powers. Special powers, though, can be granted by the employer, and proactively, I think it's a great idea to give unilateral work stop to any provincially regulated certified member in your workplace, because when dangerous work stops, everyone wins. People go home safe, the employer's happy, the workers are happy. It's a good outcome. These special powers can also, though, be granted by the Ontario Labour Relations Board, and there's a regulation that helps guide them in their decision. They consider your health and safety performance, you know, the interactions with the MLITSD, Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development, concerns they have about the functioning of your internal responsibility system, and even functioning of your bilateral work stop process. One of the top questions I get is, you know, how many people do we need to make a decision? There's nothing in the OHSA that dictates quorum. Now, federally there is, and this is in fact the definition federally, but it is a definition that I recommend that provincial committees also consider using. They simply say you've got to have more than half of your members present. If you've got 6 people, that's 4. At least half of them have to represent workers, and you have to have 1 management member present. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, especially in shift work environments, but even in environments where you may have some level of virtual work, allow members to join from anywhere. It could be with a Teams call or a Zoom or even just a teleconference. That way, if someone in, and be sure if they are, you know, coming in on their day off to be there, be sure they're paid for their call-in rate. And I really would encourage you to avoid using alternates to reach quorum. Again, I would rather have like 4 really dedicated people than 8 people that are kind of like one foot out the door. There's also no requirement to use Robert's Rules of Order where you're like moving motions and seconding motions to stop. It's not a good idea. I love voting for members in non-unionized workplaces, but I don't like voting around the committee table because I think it can really drive division. But also you get managers being like, okay, well, you know, we can't have more worker members than management members because we're going to get outvoted. Your composition ends up being a mess. And I said, okay, so you have 3 people that voted one way, 3 people voted another way. You're not any closer to a decision, and now everyone is also mad. Like, how's that working for you? Some committees will assign co-chairs to reach agreement after the discussion. My favorite way, though, is with consensus because it drives cohesion and cooperation. To build a consensus, we start by clarifying the issue, and then we figure out what's important to everyone. We need to identify our core needs and preferences. Once we know what's really important to our group members, then we brainstorm, and the hardest part is to do it without judgment. If you tell me that you want to launch, 5,000 pounds of apples into space and like launch them into the sun, I am writing that down because we're brainstorming without judgment. Is it practical? Probably not, but we're not there yet. Then we narrow down to our most feasible 2 or 3 options. This is where we consider practicalities. This is where we consider our constraints. We discuss our pros and cons. And as we finalize details, we then prepare to test for consensus. My favorite way to do this is using your hands. And if you reach consensus, then that's great. And if you don't, modify your proposal, try a new proposal, go back to the discussion, keep working. How does the hands thing work? Abstain. I abstain. Maybe I have a conflict of interest. Maybe I'm like, wow, I don't know anything about working heights. I work in an office. I'm not comfortable being a part of this discussion, and that's fair. Effectively, my core needs are not met, cannot be met, and will never be met by this proposal. My core needs are not yet met, nor my preferences, but if we keep working, I think we could get my core needs met. My core needs are met, but none of my preferences. My core needs are met and some of my preferences. My core needs are met and all of my preferences are met. I am the happiest person in the world. That is a fast and easy way. And like you can even use the hand thing with your kids. How excited are you if you're saying, oh, okay, well, we're having for dinner. Oh, we're having we can have spaghetti or we can have roast chicken. Or like, how are you feeling about spaghetti? And they're like, yeah. They're like, how are you feeling about roast chicken? It's like, yeah. They're like, okay, well, they're a little more supportive of that. It's a great way to be able to build nuance and to very quickly read a room. Let's talk now a little bit about change management. So the Joint Health and Safety Committee should be consulted about changes and informed about changes, whether it's renovations or moves or new work processes. We all remember the change that happened with the pandemic, but it could also be upgrades or new equipment. And as we think about what the committee should consider when they are being informed of potential changes, we want to consider what the risks are and what the impact will be. Are we prepared to handle any new or different risks that might have been created by our new proposals? Do we need additional training? Of course, the committee is consulted on training, training policies, training practices, training programs. How is this going to impact our existing policies? Maybe they need to be adjusted. Are there those that are going to be affected? How are we consulting with them? And how does this fit in with things like CSA standards or best practices? In making our decisions based on data, first grab some of your internal statistics and understand that in very small workplaces, you may not be able to make statistical inferences. If you've got a very small data set, if you go from 1 injury in a year to 2 injuries in a year, and you only have like 10 staff, yes, 2 is double 1. Yes, that is still a concerning rise. But if you go from like 100 injuries in a year to 200 injuries a year, I'm very worried about you. That is a very representative data set. With a very small data set, there's, a little bit of variability. Maybe you went like 3 years without an injury, and then you had 2, and then you had 1. It's just harder to make inferences. But if you go from 0, 0, 0 to 2 to 6 to 12, you can see the direction this is going. We grab our incident statistics, our first aid reports. One of the hot things that I'm always looking for is what are the causes of these? If we have 3 injuries in a year and 2 of them are slip and fall, I am going to use this to determine this as a priority for my committee, and I'm going to set a goal to reduce the number of slips, trips, falls, and we're going to work for the whole year. We're going to talk about all of the other issues, but that slips, trips, and falls yearly focus is going to be a returning agenda item on every single meeting to say, what have we done in the last month on our slips, trips, falls goal? We can also use our own safety check and Compass Tool. Compass Tool is internal, make friends with your HR department. Safety check, though, anyone can see this. If you're registered with WSIB, I can go and put your company into WSIB and go into the safety check tool and see how you're doing and then compare you against your rate group. A lot of folks don't think that this information is public information. They go, oh, it has to be behind a paywall, private information. I go, okay, the claims are. None of that is public. But if you're about to hire someone, I want to know if your safety record is any good. I also want to know if you're registered, if you paid up, and I'd also like to know how long you're registered for. Great joint health and safety committees also identify problems rather than just symptoms. They consider the people factors, equipment, material, and environment factors, as well as process factors. No one makes a decision in a vacuum. People factors are things that people do or don't do, but they're existing not in a vacuum. They're considering equipment that might not be the right fit or the right equipment, or it's, just not working for them. They're considering that the material is heavy or bulky or awkward, or it's not too much or too little. They're factoring in that it's snowy or that the aisle is really narrow and they can't get that cart in. And they're factoring in the processes, like the fact that they've been scheduled for the third clopen shift in a row. What's a clopen shift? You close and then you open. Our hazards or problems have a backstory. Understanding the backstory helps us identify root causes rather than just focusing on the band aid solutions. Great joint health and safety committees also involve workers, even beyond just the worker members. Here at WSPS, we have Workers' Voice open forum meetings. They're run by the worker members of the committee only, no management allowed. And they're invited based on work groups. I had to go to the one for East and North. It's a great way for the Joint Health and Safety Committee to share what they're working on and for the employees to be able to share their concerns so that the Joint Health and Safety Committee can move forward on those as well. So, how do we catch senior leadership's attention? Ultimately, it starts by figuring out what your senior leaders care about. Some senior leaders only care about money. A colleague, or it's not a colleague, is a family member. I have a family member of mine who works at Ski Hill out in Western Canada. He started out as their chief financial officer. He became their head of health and safety because he turned to the owner and he said, I cannot make you profitable until you deal with your safety problems. The math, she's not mathing. And for all of his previous attempts at talking about, goodness and ensuring that folks were being set up for success, the thing that ultimately caught that senior leader's eye was the fact that the business was at risk. It could be their corporate image, it could be humanitarianism, like Habitat for Humanity. Nobody, I think that Habitat for Humanity, which by the way does have a really fantastic safety program, no one wins when someone gets a house, but somebody got hurt getting there, right? So it's a great opportunity to be able to build around our values as an organization. Some managers will connect with, their ethics, or they are very concerned about their own personal liabilities. In a community like yours, one of the best ways to connect with a senior leader is to really show how this helps go right to the heart and say, this is about us. This is about us as a community being strong, being healthy, thriving as individuals, thriving as a collective. I think there's real value in being able to show that. Another way you can get senior leaders to take notice of what you're doing is that the optional JHSC annual report. Now, in the federal sector, there is a report that is mandatory that has to go to ESDC. The one I'm talking about is just to submit to senior leaders to see what you've been up to. Include how many meetings you had, how many inspections you did, the number of hazards you identified in your inspection, so they can see all the great work you're doing. How many formal written recommendations did you submit versus how many were actually implemented? How many complaints were made? How many work refusals did your worker members attend? And how many work stoppages were initiated by certified members of the JHSC? Again, provincially regulated workplaces only. And you could include 1 to 3 big wins. If I saw a reduction in the number of slip, trip, fall injuries by 25% from a year of us focusing in on that, include that in your report. That way they can see what you're proud of. Consider investing in yourselves. You could even have a full day summit. I'm happy to come and work with you, either virtually or in person, where we look at, your terms of reference. We review it, see if it's still current. We review your training program strategy. You may have day of learning activities. We could do a session on consensus building. That's one of my favorite things to talk about, where that whole like hands thing, there's a whole 1.5 hours on how to do that. And then there's activities that you can, in fact, go through where you really learn to work together to build the consensus. You can then review health and safety policies as well as risk assessments, see if they're current, see if there are things that need to be adjusted. In the federal sector, there's something called the Hazard Prevention Program, the HPP, that's a legal requirement. And it's a great example of a program along with your hazard and risk assessments that drive the hazard prevention program that in fact require a regular review. We can evaluate how well your tools are working, your meeting agendas, your template for your meeting minutes. Have some conversations about how well your inspection checklists are working. Maybe you need to adjust your tools to maximize success. You could invite senior leaders to attend and contribute, even if it's only virtually, to be able to say, hey, thank you so much for being on our JHSC. This is what we're doing for you. Be sure that you're including a review of your violence and harassment policies and programs. They are reviewed annually. And I always recommend that you plan 1 year's worth of meetings and inspections, including your various zones and areas. I'm happy to have, I've got a whole session on leveling up your Joint Health and Safety Committee's greatness if you're interested in learning more about that. But it's a great opportunity to be able to kind of set your plan for the year. And of course, those annual goals and objectives. We also want to think about our communication pathways. Not every item, in fact, requires a formal written business case. If you're dealing with something that's a quick fix and an easy win, management support's already secured, your organization is proactive, small, or it affects one group or work site, you could choose the less formal approach. You could make a quick call, send a quick Teams message, maybe it's an email. It could even be a maintenance ticket to your maintenance department. But we want to use a formal written business case for more complex issues, situations where management support is not secured. It involves changes to policies, changes to programs, changes to anything you would need organizational leadership rather than maybe a frontline manager involved. You may want to consider that formal written business case. Maybe it affects multiple groups or sites where it's above the level of a frontline manager. Another hot topic is repeat items. If you have repeat items, whether it's on an inspection, whether it's, just the same recommendations keep cropping up over and over again, it shows that you have not, in fact, addressed the root causes and contributing factors for that issue. I give the example of a fire escape. Perhaps it's loaded with stuff. You go move all the stuff, and then the next month, all of that stuff is back in front of that fire door. You go, okay, there's more to this. This was not simply a housekeeping issue. Obviously, this is happening for a reason. Maybe we don't have space for it. Maybe we don't have shelving. Maybe folks don't know that's an exit. Maybe it's not adequately signed. There's going to be a root cause behind it. And we want to drill down deeper to figure out exactly why this is happening. As we build the business case, clearly state what the hazard is. If I have a cord across a walkway, I trip and fall and hit my head on a desk, that the hazard is not my head injury. It's the actual cord that I tripped on. And the contributing factor to that cord may be the fact that the painters didn't put the blinds back up and now the office is too hot. When we look at the hazard, clearly state the hazard and don't say, oh, slip, trip, fall hazard. We found slip, trip, fall hazards in the office. You found an extension cord powering a fan across the walkway to the entrance to the accounting department. Be specific. We want to include a rationale for addressing the issue. We could be citing sections of the Act, regulations, or the Canada Labour Code as appropriate. Explain not only why we should fix it, but also why we should fix it now. Provide enough detail, thinking, if I don't know anything about this, could I read this and make sense of it? And then who's going to take charge? If you assign someone, someone is no one. Assign based on either a name or a title. Actions could involve short, medium, or long-term solutions, or a combination of the three. If I have water dripping from a leaking pipe, my short-term solution may be to mop that up, put a wet floor sign, and get a bucket to catch the water. Medium term, I'm going to work with procurement to have a plumber come and repair that particular line. And then long term, we may in fact even want to consider taking a look, if we're having numerous leaks, we may even want to consider having the plumber in to replace some of that plumbing completely if it has reached the end of its life. And think about the time frames for each, because as you can see, each of those actions came with a different time frame. It may be that the mop, the bucket, and the sign is going to happen immediately. The plumber is going to come maybe within the next 3 to 5 days, business days. But then replacement of all of the plumbing, if in fact that is something that would be appropriate given the circumstances, may take 6 months, a year, or more to be able to get senior leadership budgeting, to be able to, maybe you're having to go back to another level of government to get funding for this. We're having to find it in the budget, maybe for the following fiscal year. So there are going to be timeframes attached to delivery of that. And if you are dealing with a more complex situation with multiple actions, multiple different responsible parties, and multiple timeframes, I always recommend something like a chart. So where we've got the action, the responsible party, the timeframe, and then a completion date. So you're able to track when each of these items are completed, right on your chart. And I usually start with the story, start with the why, and then move on to my chart. We have some great resources that will be shared with you by GovernWise, and I believe they're going to be shared next week. WSPS has some fantastic resources. We have some great no-cost webinars that you're able to join, and we also are now starting to offer some level of complimentary consulting as well, things like a compliance assessment tool. We can also work with you over the phone. We don't necessarily have to visit your community for some of that. We offer training and certifications. And of course, there's the WSIB Health and Safety Excellence Program. I describe the Excellence Program as kind of like your 10th grade math teacher giving you 20 bucks every time you do your homework. And how much better would we all be at math if we just got paid to do that homework we were supposed to do anyway? How does the Excellence Program work? By registering and then completing topics, you're building new health and safety programs, policies, and practices as a workplace based on your needs and where you are in either a basic, intermediate, or advanced health and safety culture. The WSIB, in fact, it qualifies you for money back on your premiums. The more topics you complete, the more money you get. And the numbers, the amount of money that you get back is actually doubled if you're a small business for joining and then completing those excellence topics. So that's it. I hope this session was valuable. I hope that you were able to have some fantastic takeaways.